Avengers Age of Ultron is garbage, folks.
Is it an alligator or a crocodile? I don't know the difference, and at this point I'm too afraid to ask.
Look at that. That is a werewolf, folks.
What is up, everyone? Welcome to Den of Geek presents Marvel Standom Live, where each week we give you the deepest possible dives on all the goings-on in the MCU, Marvel Comics, and beyond. I'm your host, Mike Cicchini, the editor-in-chief of denofgeek.com. And with me for all time and always, if I'm lucky, I've got Den of Geek TV editor Alec Bajalin and Den of Geek News and Features editor Kirsten Howard. And please welcome the editor-in-chief of the three-time back-to-back Eisner-winning WWAC, Nola Pfau. How's everybody doing today? Welcome, Nola.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good to have you. You're our first Eisner winner, I think.
Wow. I'm sorry that like of all of the available Eisner winners, you got me.
No, don't be. Like, look, we had to start somewhere, right? Like,
That's true. That's fair. You got to work your way up to the real famous ones.
What should our audience know about WWAC?
WWAC is short for Women Write About Comics, but it's not just women. We are a comics journalism site that very specifically focuses on giving voice to marginalized people across the gender spectrum. So people who have otherwise not really had a place to go when it comes to talking about comics and interacting with comics and writing about them, we give them that place.
So it's basically the opposite of the intelligentsia site that was that appeared on.
That's true. Yes. Yeah.
We will get to that, I promise. But yeah, let folks know that URL as well, because I know you have a murderer's row of terrific writers over there, and I think folks should be checking out WWAC when they can.
Yeah, that's it's womenwriteaboutcomics.com, spelled correctly, every word in order.
Folks, this week we are planning to spend as much time as possible talking about bringing the X-Men to the MCU, and as little time as we can get away with talking about this week's episode of She-Hulk, if I have anything to do with it. Is everyone cool with that? Are there any other Marvel goings-on that we need to hit before we dive into it today?
Has there been any big Marvel news this week? Fantastic Four got some writers, didn't it?
Oh yeah. That's I think that qualifies.
Exterminators #1 dropped, which I think is a pretty solid comic.
Who's the creative team on that new Exterminators?
Leah Williams is writing. I cannot remember about it just off the top of my head right now.
Is this the second volume of Exterminators since like the Hickman relaunch?
No,
so it's the
no,
first?
This is the first.
Okay, I've unfortunately lost track of the current X-Men verse, and I need to get caught up so that I can read Axe properly.
This one is it's like a very grindhouse comic with Boom Boom and Laura Kinney Wolverine and a couple other characters fighting vampires, and it gets wild. It's their first, like, I think it actually has a content warning on it.
I'm stopping at my LCS on the way home, and this is suddenly getting picked up. So before we get into the thick of it with today's show, we should just talk about our sponsor real quick. Just want to remind everybody about our sponsor, Diet Smoke. Diet Smoke is the solution to avoid those, oh no, I'm way too high moments. Diet Smoke makes Delta 8 THC, Delta 9 THC, and CBD products that are perfectly balanced. Their gummies, drinks, and vapes are not only delicious, they are guaranteed to give you that beautiful buzz you've been looking for without melting you into the couch. Diet Smoke extracts their THC and CBD from American-grown hemp, meaning they can ship directly to your door. No prescription, no sketchy weed dealer, no need to even leave the house, folks. Diet Smoke just released a bunch of new products and flavors. So no matter what type of mood you're in, they've got you covered. So if you're ready for that perfect high, head over to dietsmoke.com and use code Den of Geek, all caps, spelled correctly, as Nola says, for 15% off your entire purchase. Must be 21 and older to order, and please use responsibly. Honestly, I think before I dive back into the current X-Men run, I might once again sample some Diet Smoke products myself. I think these might be a perfect pairing. So let's talk about the X-Men, and this is interesting. You know, last few episodes when we've been diving into comic stuff, you know, I've watched Alex's eyes glaze over as the show goes on. But fortunately, because of the fact that the X-Men were, you know, really the most successful comic book movie franchise of all time until the MCU came along, and because they've had multiple brilliant animated series and they achieved a kind of level of pop culture saturation that other things that we've talked about probably haven't. Alec, welcome to the party, pal.
Yeah. I don't know if you'll find my X-Men takes all that appealing anyway. You might regret it.
Oh, really? Uh-oh. Okay. All right. Here we go. So, so wait. Flaccid House says Dazzler is on this Exterminators logo.
That's correct. Yes.
Oh, hell yes. Yeah, this is going to be fun. I'm reading this tonight. Should we start with the Fox X-Men films? Because I think they're kind of the biggest elephant in the room as far as what most people are familiar with the franchise from. And also they're the hurdle that the MCU is going to have to clear.
Sounds good to me, because that when I said you're going to be disappointed, what I meant was this is all I can talk about.
Wait, are you too young for X-Men the animated series? Like, were you too young?
No, I was kind of the right age for that. I was 90s, but I never really got into it. Like, I've definitely seen an episode or two.
Yeah, he's wearing a football jersey. He wasn't watching X-Men cartoon.
That's funny. I'm just getting more and more antagonistic to you nerds every week. I'm gonna have a full football uniform on within a few weeks. Look, I've seen some episodes and it was good, but if I were to watch anything, when I was younger, I would watch Batman animated series. And then when I got a little older, I was more into the Spider-Man animated series. My knowledge of the animated series is really just thinking Gambit was cool, and then being disappointed when he wasn't in any of the first two X-Men movies.
Yeah, they really were like afraid of Gambit as a character in those movies, I noticed.
Well, think about how insufferable Gambit would be in the movies if not perfectly cast and very carefully written. I must confess that as a teenager, I also shamefully stand Gambit.
He talked weird and he threw stuff. And like, as a child, I don't know what else you can ask for.
Well, I was into Anne Rice books at the time. And so like, there was like that kind of New Orleans connection, and, you know, he was mysterious and, you know, like, obviously he's not a vampire, but he's got that kind of like, you know, shaggy, vampiric cool about him. And I was looking for something to hang my mid-90s teenage grungy, moody hat on. And unfortunately, it was Gambit's occasionally creepy self.
I feel like if Gambit hasn't shown up as a vampire in one comic over the years, that seems like a missed opportunity.
I would have to go back and check Curse of the Mutants to see if that happened. That's a really good question. I know that he was one of Apocalypse's horsemen. He was Death for a while, which kind of counts, I guess. I don't know.
I think everybody in New Orleans is an honorary vampire anyway.
Right.
I can get behind that. That's the kind of generalization I can get behind. Flaccid House just said Shaggy Vampiric Cool was my dad's 70s funk band. Well, it's already a chaotic episode because we're supposed to be talking about the Fox X-Men.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Alec, I'm going to kick this back to you and let you get first crack at this, since you suffered through weeks and weeks of incomprehensible comic book jargon from us.
All right, well, I appreciate that. And my hot take is that most X-Men movies are bad. Like the 2000 X-Men is kind of bad. It's fine, but it's mostly bad. Last Stand, bad. Every other movie aside from First Class, bad. However, X-Men 2 is like a borderline masterpiece. X2 X-Men United is a phenomenal movie. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember loving it so much. And I think it's because more so than maybe any other superhero movie I've ever seen, it captures the downtime better than anything. Like the quiet moments between battles, people just wandering around the mansion. There's just like there's this incredible series of scenes in it where Logan is just like can't sleep and is walking around at night, and he sees like one kid flicking through the channels with his eyes using his power, and somebody else is just like posted up in the kitchen. It's like the X-Men After Hours movie, and it really is a novel approach. And even the main storyline itself is pretty cool. I think we've kind of forgotten that Brian Cox is the main villain in this, which, like, you know,
Oh, I haven't.
nearly 2 decades before Logan Roy. So yeah, since I was given the honor of leading off, my most powerful take is that X-Men 2 is like top 4 superhero movie ever.
Nola, how about you?
I will agree that X2 is definitely the best of the bunch. It has a lot of my favorite scenes. I think it's the one that best encapsulates the whole conceit of the X-Men, which is, you know, that whole sworn to protect a world that hates and fears them. You've got Stryker, who is a pastor in the comics, but he's reimagined as a general in this, which gives him access to like military forces, and they do that like whole midnight strike on the mansion, and you know, so you've got troops busting in and capturing kids, and it really, like, it's worrisome and it's scary in just the right way. It expands on the first movie, because the first movie is really just about like 7 mutants wearing leather who fight Magneto, but this one is really, it emphasizes the way that Xavier is putting time into building a community for children, and it shows off the way that people are arrayed against that and are trying to tear that all apart. And I think that is maybe the best, like I said, the best single encapsulation of the whole X-Men deal into a movie.
Kirsty, how about you?
Yeah, putting aside, if it's physically possible to do so, the fact that, you know, most of these films have people who are allegedly terrible people as directors. You know, I think these films are, I've never not enjoyed one. I watched The New Mutants recently, and that was a hard go, but I've found them all pretty entertaining, I would say.
I don't think any of them have aged particularly well
Oh,
for
no.
that first batch.
Definitely not.
like honestly, I don't think X-Men The Last Stand is any worse than the first movie, which is like really heavy-handed and really like poorly directed and lit, and like every action scene feels like it takes place like inside like a cardboard box or something. Like, you know, Bryan Singer has never ever competently directed an action sequence. X2 does hold up in a lot of ways, mostly for the reasons outlined by Nola and Alec, but like I have no desire to watch any of that trilogy again. Days of Future Past is okay. First Class is pretty good, but if I'm going to watch any of these X-Men flicks, it's going to be Logan, and you know, and it'll be Deadpool. And I didn't even think New Mutants was all that bad. Like New Mutants, like you can definitely see the, like where they edited that thing with a rusty hatchet, but there's the germ of something there where New Mutants was trying to do something different, you know, like it was trying to do its Nightmare on Elm Street 3 thing, you know, and like, I kind of could get behind that. And I kind of wish there was more than that, more of that kind of risk taking in superhero movies in general. I don't know. It's not a good movie. Don't get me wrong. But I admire what it attempted to do there.
Yeah, I really enjoy the way that they managed to adapt an infamously racist comic book storyline and managed to be racist in entirely new ways in the movie.
Fair. That's, maybe I was being too charitable, Nola.
Outside of the main group movies, was it just the Wolverine movies and Deadpool? Have there been any other ones that I've missed?
There was that when X-Men Origins Wolverine came out, they announced that they were going to do other X-Men Origins films, and then that one bombed, so they just abandoned that plan. But originally, Wolverine was announced alongside an X-Men Origins Magneto movie that ended up never getting made.
What's interesting, by the way, about that X-Men Origins Magneto movie, like a script was written, like I think it was David Goyer who might have written that. And a lot of the concepts in that, and I think even a couple of the scenes in that ended up in X-Men First Class. I don't think it would have worked on its own anyway, but they definitely were able to recycle some elements of that into X-Men First Class. But like talking about that transition from, that awkward middle period after X-Men The Last Stand, and before they kind of like soft rebooted the franchise with X-Men First Class, we get into the issue of how these movies, their timeline is as incomprehensible as as that of the X-Men comics at that point. They couldn't quite pick a lane, like First Class is, in my opinion, one of the better ones. But the timeline is weird. It's like, it's clearly meant to be a prequel to the first movie in a lot of ways, but then they quickly abandoned that because they tried to then jump ahead to the 70s with the next film, and the 90s or the 80s with X-Men Apocalypse, and the less said about that, the better. But like nobody really aged, and like they didn't quite, yeah, Lee's asking, like how they skip 10 years a movie, but no one ages. Exactly. And then Dark Phoenix, I feel like they just kind of like abandoned that conceit entirely. It's a weird one. It's really difficult. It felt like they were trying to get somewhere with Days of Future Past, and that kind of went out the window. I don't know what to make of this franchise anymore. The MCU needs to make a clean break.
It's a pretty convoluted thing at this point, and as much as like Kirsten, I enjoyed the movies coming out. I enjoyed seeing them because, frankly, I'm the type of X-Men fan where I don't care how bad they are. I will watch them. My whole thing with pop culture adaptations is that I enjoy seeing where they fail as much as where they succeed. The attempt is what's interesting to me. I like seeing them try to do something, and I like seeing how well it works. And I like seeing what gets changed and what doesn't get changed. And like those things are interesting to me. So I don't necessarily need a superhero movie to be good. I'm interested in it regardless because I want to see how it accomplishes what it tries to accomplish.
Yeah, it's just as interesting to me when something comes out and it's messy, because if there's been some ambition there to do something different, that they haven't quite made it work the whole time, or that it's been patchy, that feels like I'll revisit stuff like that more often than stuff that is just it's decent and it goes from A to B and it's okay. But I tend to definitely revisit movies that are messier. I also revisit a lot of movies that I just downright loathe. I don't know what's wrong with me, but like if I really hate a movie, I'll watch it like 10 times and be like, why do I hate this? I really over-examine it. I think that I need some serious therapy, honestly.
You're talking to somebody who watches the 1970s live action Spider-Man TV series like for genuine pleasure often. You're talking to perhaps the only living defender of the Matt Salinger Canon Films Captain America movie. So I feel you. I even like the weird Thor and Daredevil that we got in those Incredible Hulk TV movies in the 80s. To me, that is very much what Nola's talking about. I am older than dirt and therefore grew up in a time when this stuff was scarce and I had to latch on and defend, you know what I mean? So now, I have watched the Roger Corman Fantastic Four movie more than I have watched all three of the 20th Century Fox Fantastic Four movies combined. So like I'm with you on this, but I have less patience for it and less tolerance for it when it's a big budget thing that has no reason to fail, and especially when there's like weird patchy like studio notey stuff happening in it, like we have with X-Men The Last Stand and X-Men Dark Phoenix, and I don't know.
I mean, I get that. I guess the studio interference thing, I'm interested in that too, because I'm interested in the dynamics of how the movie gets made behind the scenes and the ways that companies will try to lean on something like that and trying to understand what their motivation is. Like when I first started writing, one of the first things I published on WWAC was an article about an old court case between Marvel and the government, where they were arguing that mutants weren't humans in direct opposition to their comics at the time, because they wanted to pay less tax on imports of action figures. So
what?
Yeah. So there's this whole thing where between like the late 80s and the early 2000s, dolls of humans were taxed at a higher rate than dolls of non-humans. So like monster creatures and things like that were taxed at a lower rate. And so in a bid to save money, Toy Biz, which Marvel was a part of Marvel at the time because they were the same company, basically, they went to court to argue that because mutants had superpowers, that they weren't human. Even though X-Men comics are at the time, like the whole conceit of the X-Men is, yeah, they have powers, but they're born that way. They're just like you and me. They're still people. They still have lives. So Marvel ended up arguing against their own comics in court. And I think like Beast was one of the prime things that they used as an example, because he's just this like built large furry thing. And they were like, this is not a human. You can't reasonably call this a human because he's 300 pounds and covered in blue fur. Yeah, so they ended up eventually winning the case, but it took so long for them to win it that the tax code itself that they were fighting against was repealed by the time they won it. So it was a moot point. But yeah, no. So like, I'm really interested in the ways that corporations and big companies mess around with their own properties in an attempt to squeeze money out of things, even when those decisions are bonkers, even when they don't make sense. And every fan in the world was like, what are you doing? I'm still interested in seeing those things happen because it's fascinating to me.
I know we need to move on from this because like we have other points we need to hit, but I just need to backtrack for 1 second here. Alec, you said all these movies are terrible except for X2. Even Logan, even Deadpool, these don't move you at all. Like,
I just never got around to it.
I have some very basic bro opinions in me, it's like yes, like the Dark Knight really is that good, and like Logan really is that good, and like those are just like my most basic boring opinions that you can get, but Logan is really good, man. Like
I believe you. I'm sure
I have one major criticism of Logan, and that is how cowardly they were with the adaptations of Donald Pierce and the Reavers. I want my wild cyborg outlaws. I want my metal limbs and my mohawk dude with tank treads instead of legs. Give me that wild stuff. Don't give me some dude wearing sunglasses and black leather.
Fair. I guess the world wasn't ready for that. And I think everything else in the movie, like all being equal, they could have still done that. And that movie would still be considered. I mean, like that was definitely one of those movies that they presented as like, this is kind of like an elevated, like, is this going to get awards consideration? Like blah, 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 blah. If they give you the Reavers that Nola wants, then this is basically the same thing. Nothing has to change, but then you get into like Fury Road levels of Gonzo.
Yeah, that's how you win the awards.
Yeah.
It's well-known fact. It's well-known fact that tank tread cyborgs equal Oscars.
I think they should replace the Oscar statue with one with cybernetic tank treads. That might actually become a ceremony that I would watch.
I thought Logan was okay, just okay. I think I was the only person in the world, maybe, because I've never heard someone else say Logan was just okay. It's always like 5 stars, 10, no notes. And I watched it, I thought, oh, that's just okay.
This perfectly entertaining film.
It was fine.
Look, the MCU is introducing mutants in a kind of backdoor way, which I think is smart. Like they want to bring in the concept of mutants and mutation long before they try and give us the X-Men. And I think it's going to be a long time before we even hear the words X-Men uttered on screen in the MCU. Like, I do not think we're actually going to hear this until after Secret Wars and the Kang Dynasty. I just don't see it happening before Phase 6. But were they to do this, and when they do this, what would everybody's ideal roster look like, and how much of a break should they make from the, kind of iconic expected rosters that we've seen in the previous films?
I would love for it to not be about Wolverine for a change. I understand why they went that route, and I understand that like Wolverine is their biggest moneymaker and he's got to be there. I don't think that the movies need to be about him the way that the Fox films always were. Or if they're gonna bring in Wolverine, Daphne Kinney, or Daphne, what's her last name, from Logan, is a nice age to play an adult Laura Kinney these days, or like coming up on young adulthood. So you've got a way to bring that back with the way that they seem to be sort of leaning into all Marvel properties are canon in some fashion or another. I think that they could bring her back as a more grown Laura Kinney and let her be Wolverine, without necessarily linking the rest of it too much to the prior films. Yeah, I would like to see. It's so hard to decide because like they've tried Dark Phoenix twice and failed twice, but that remains one of the most iconic X-Men stories, the Phoenix Saga and the Dark Phoenix Saga. And it's one of those things where it's like, well, do you wait for them to try it a third time and see if they can get it right this time? Or do you just put it to bed for, another 10, 20 years and maybe try again the next go round? I would love to see Hellfire Club nonsense. I'd love to.
I 100% agree on Logan. I feel like it's time to leave, that version of Wolverine behind. I think that there's an opportunity for them to keep on the Fox X-Men cast, or at least pick the ones that they want to bring back. Like cast new X-Men that we haven't perhaps seen before, only seen in very small portions. Perhaps keep on some of the bigger stars that they had. It just feels right. I mean, the way that they're sort of rebooting Daredevil, saying, this isn't season 4, and we talked about it a while ago about saying that all this definitely happened. We're just never going to talk about it in this new Born Again show. So I feel like they could keep people on, like maybe Fassbender and McAvoy, and bring back Evan Peters as Quicksilver if they wanted. These are all people that I think would return to the roles, and certainly have returned to the roles, in films that weren't terrific. So yeah, why not? I mean, just reimagine it with what you have, and then just cast new characters to join them. And that sounds pretty good to me, actually.
Galec's like Gambit.
Gambit. I empathize with your guys' approach to Wolverine, but you have to imagine that including Wolverine is non-negotiable for Disney.
Oh yeah, I mean that's what I said. Like he's going to be there. I would just like the movies to not be about him.
I can't really speak to deep cut X-Men characters I'd really like to see. However, Lee in the comments mentioning Phase 7 through 9 should be the Mutant Saga.
Yes,
a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and let that culminate in the Dark Phoenix Saga, make Jean evolve into the big bad of,
or even that'd be a big swing. And I'm sure MCU could pull it off, but I was thinking something even on like a smaller scale than that. The big culmination of Phase 9, or maybe Phase 7 or Phase 9, whatever, could be the X-Men movie. And then the heavy hitters are just seeded in with their own films or as supporting characters in other Marvel character films prior to that. And then our big team up effort, as opposed to being an Avengers outing, will be an X-Men outing. come the end of 7, 8, or 9. That's like kind of the first time that approach has made sense to me now, just thinking about it now since Lee threw it out there. I feel like they should go it that way as to who they should include, like who has enough gravitas to headline their own Marvel film. The list is probably Wolverine, Xavier, Magneto, Storm. I would say Cyclops, but I just have a soft spot for James Marsden. And then, I don't know. I feel like the rest you could just kind of seed in and out of all the other films. So that's my take.
Well, and Cyclops, like before the rise of like Wolverine as the omnipresent mutant that everyone loves, Cyclops was considered by, at least by like Marvel editorial at the time, to be the lead character of the ensemble, which is why so many of the stories are about him. You've got so much to do with him and his romance with Jean, and and then Jean's death and his new wife, and his whole thing about the Summers family. Like, so much of it centers around Cyclops because he was their lead character. Like that's what they considered their lead before, like the rise of Wolverine in the late 80s to early 90s really eclipsed that. So like there's a lot of meat for movies right there just by drawing on Cyclops's messy history. Give me Inferno.
Wow,
That's what I
yeah.
want. Give me Scott leaving his wife to reunite with his high school girlfriend, and then his wife causing a hellish takeover of New York. Give me that.
Wolverine is coming. We're getting Wolverine in these movies. Like that's like saying that Warner Brothers isn't going to put Batman in DC movies. You know what I mean? But Wolverine should be introduced elsewhere in the MCU, like, and not even as a mutant initially. They should treat this character as somebody that we know nothing about, because the beauty of Wolverine and the thing that made Wolverine so popular in the comics initially was that this was a mysterious character with a shadowy past and, who, carries 6 knives at all times. I would love to see Wolverine as a shield agent, like Wolverine as somebody operating in the shadows of, the kind of world that the Falcon and Winter Soldier took place in. I think that's the place to introduce a character like Wolverine, whether you make him, again, Alpha Flight. Like the MCU is in need of more secret organizations. You know what I mean? Like, so do we bring in Alpha Flight as some Canadian answer to SHIELD? And this is their wet works guy? Like, great. But like, treat this character as somebody that we know nothing about. And, hint that he ran missions in World War II with Cap and Bucky. I think that's the way to kind of seed this guy in long before we try and shoehorn him into the X-Men. And look, Xavier and Cyclops are kind of non-negotiable, right? But introduce them as supporting characters, like make Xavier the face of this movement and Cyclops is this mysterious, like scary bodyguard he's got at all times. And it sets up.
I like that.
Yeah. I kind of like the idea of make Scott Xavier's muscle at first, and then 2 things have to happen there. Either Scott has to step into the spotlight as, the mutant who kind of has to be perfect as the face of this movement, despite the fact that he's an imperfect character, or he becomes fully radicalized, as we've seen happen in recent comics as well. Like, I think there's a lot of places they can go with these characters that the Fox movies never touched, and that, frankly, even like great stuff like the 90s animated series never touched. Yeah, I think the key is they just have to not fall into, well, we have to tease the Dark Phoenix saga. We have to do this. We have to do that. It's like, you can do all of these things. And I am absolutely convinced that if they're going to ever attempt Phoenix again, it's got to be a phase. It's got to be 2 phases. It's got to be the kind of thing. And we have to be so attached to Jean that turn is heartbreaking. But did they already do this with Wanda?
I want to say no.
Okay.
I think a lot of what they tried to do with Wanda didn't really work. I do like that Wanda's arc became about grief over loss, because I think that that's a much better interpretation of her struggles than the way the comics originally did it. which was just, oh, powerful woman crazy, which is not a thing that we need more of. Going back to what you're saying about Wolverine, though, I like it's a perfect way to seed him by just adapting the way that he appeared in the comics. Like, send him after Hulk. It's good cinema. It's a good nod to the origins. It introduces the character. It's fun. People want to see that fight anyway. Make it happen.
I'd like to see the cast of Legion back, actually.
Yeah.
Fun.
Just like, Jean Smart and Jermaine Clement just strolling into the MCU. I mean, just that works for me.
You know what? I mean, like, look, we know that certain elements of these movies have to kind of make it into this because Deadpool is coming. Like, we know that Deadpool is coming. So if Deadpool is coming,
inevitable.
Yeah, like, why not Legion? Like, if those two things, if some combination of those two things formed the basis of the MCU's X-Men, background, because nothing that happens in those shows has to have happened in another universe. There's nothing that happened in Legion or in Deadpool that we can't just say was happening in the background of the MCU, right? Like, bring Josh Brolin back as Cable. Like, I can see this. And that's kind of like the aesthetic and the casting that I would love to see more of. More love for Legion, please.
If they're going to do everything that, we want, like this kind of cautious approach to introducing X-Men, like a little bit here, a little bit there, I'm just thinking of what like a contractual negotiation nightmare it must be for Disney. Like, because I mean, like you just spent, trillions of dollars on Fox with the intention of bringing X-Men in, and then you have to explain to some agent that you want their client to just like, I'll do a guest spot here and a guest spot there. They're like, he's playing Wolverine, dude. Like, like you're not going to pay him like $20 million to like headline a movie. Like,
we've talked a little bit about the stories that we don't want to see again. And again, Alex already like checking out. And Kirsty, I don't know how deep your X-Men comics knowledge is, but Nola, you certainly have read your share from what I could tell. If there is one X-Men story from any era that you think would work either as a film or as like the subject of a phase, as we discussed before, what do you think it should be?
I want the absolute family drama mess of Inferno. I want Mr. Sinister. I want Maddie Pryor. I want, Limbo Invasion. I want all of it. It is, like I said, it's a story about Scott Summers leaving his wife because his high school sweetheart is back among the living and he wants to go play superhero with her. His wife gets, like, it turns out all of this other things, like all this other stuff is going on. She turns out to be a clone of Jean that Mr. Sinister was using specifically to get to Cyclops because he's got this weird obsession with Cyclops's like genetic heritage and his DNA. And she's actually Cable's mom. So like they've already introduced Cable. And if they bring Josh Brolin back, this is a perfect opportunity to introduce the story of Madeline Pryor. And I would love to see kind of that story play out. And I would love to see Maddie get her due finally, because I am one of those people who will relentlessly evangelize for how Madeline Pryor was treated in the comics and how she continues to be treated.
Do we think that the sort of Hoxpox and post-Hoxpox sort of era of X-Men can work in the MCU?
I think that it can work. I actually think that they're better than even odds of Hoxpox being the era that they go with, just in order to do something that is different from prior movies. Hoxpox is a really interesting experiment for me because it's people are reading it like it's meant to be some sort of utopia, and it kind of is, but at the same time, the story is about how the mutants fail at trying to achieve what they're doing. And I think a lot of people don't quite understand that in the reading. It's meant to be messy, and they're meant to try things that make them look bad and don't quite work because they have to figure out how to do these things as people. They have to get to a point where they do the right thing, because there's no good story in just doing the right thing from the start. That's boring. So I think Hoxpox is possible. I think it'll be very stripped down if they do it. I think it'll be a lot of beautiful visual scenery involving Krakoan portals, and
Yes.
maybe a lot less of the politics and everything involved.
But I would love to see those politics. I would love to see all that. So,
Yeah.
But I know what you mean. There's no chance, but I would love
Yeah,
to see it.
yeah, they're too afraid of it.
Is the MCU too afraid of the politics of the X-Men in general?
I think the MCU is too afraid of the politics of Marvel Comics in general.
Hmm.
I think the MCU runs extremely conservative in comparison to the comics, because you've got that huge militaristic shield bent that colored the tone of this first several phases. It's important to remember that in the comics, shield was not originally this omnipresent entity that was treated as like the good guys. They were viewed as suspicious and shady, and they were presented as much of a problem as anything else. Nick Fury was a great like wartime hero, but then like he transitioned from being a World War II soldier into being this like massive super spy. And I think we live in an age where we have glorified the idea of the super spy so much that we forget that they are agents of state. They're generally out there committing something just short of war crimes, if not actual war crimes. I think that the movies in general have forgotten a lot of the very, very mistrusting liberal bent of the original Marvel comics.
I agree.
This has been such a thoughtful, stimulating conversation that it's a shame that we also have to talk about this week's episode of She-Hulk. So, Kirsty, why don't you tell us what happened on this week's She-Hulk?
Okay, in She-Hulk episode 6, Jen is a bridesmaid at an old friend's wedding, but is constantly demeaned during the proceedings, as even though she's experienced huge changes in her life, it's ingrained that the only thing that matters is that she's still single. Titania then shows up at the wedding, spoiling for a fight, and Jen eventually relents and kicks her ass as She-Hulk. Meanwhile, back at the law firm, Nikki and Mallory try to wrangle a healthy settlement for the ex-partners of Mr. Immortal, who would rather kill himself repeatedly than face any sort of confrontation. It sounds like quite a lot of guys I know, honestly. But anyway, in the final moments of the episode, it appears that some bad people who hate She-Hulk have formulated another plan to steal her blood.
That's it for this week's episode of Marvel Standom, folks. Nola, you may or may not know that we've been a little lukewarm on this show, often kind of split down the middle as like from episode to episode about whether we like that week or not. What did you think of, what do you think of the show overall? But what do you think about this episode too?
My opinion of the show overall is that it is capital F fine. It's just fine. It's there. It's, sure, if you're going to adapt She-Hulk, sure, okay, this is what you did. Cool. I got better things to do with my time. I have been watching every episode because like I said, I'm interested in how things fail. Every episode at least has one little scene that I wish that there was more of, one little scene that I genuinely enjoyed. In this one, none of it is the She-Hulk wedding stuff. None of it. I do like the Mr. Immortal B plot. I do like the way that plays out, but mostly I like the way, I forget the name of the other lawyer that
Mallory, I think,
is helping. I really appreciate the way that like she is set up as this hyper competent, hyper professional, cold person, and it's very easy to fall into the trap of making her some sort of antagonist because of that. As we see with female characters so very often. And instead having her warm up to Jen's friend, who also's name I can't remember. This is just a thing with me today. Don't ask me the name of anyone. I've never seen or met anyone in my life. I really enjoyed the fact that was a bonding experience for them. I really enjoyed the fact that they warmed up to each other and were, sort of developing friendships by the end. That's the kind of stuff I like to see, because that has been such an uncommon thing in film and TV. So often you've got male writers behind the scene who are pitting women against each other. I like to see a departure from that. Yeah, I don't know that I needed much else of the rest of that episode.
Alec, I know better than to ask Kirsty. Alec, what about you?
How come Kirsty's excused?
Yeah.
We'll get to me, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, look, I have a feeling I like this episode more than Kirsty or Mike did, but it was also pretty lifeless. One thing that I'm always defending this show for is its use of TV tropes and how it really likes to indulge them. But when I talk about it, it also kind of should go without saying that it has to be good too. And that's kind of the case with this episode, where Lord knows I love me a surprise wedding episode of anything. And Jen, even when she breaks the fourth wall, says like, surprise, we're doing a wedding. And like that, the concept of that is charming mid-season. Just like the last thing we saw last week was the Daredevil helmet. And now it's almost like where the audience is being trolled with just this weird little light and breezy wedding sojourn, which I appreciate in theory. It just also has to be good, and this one's not particularly good. It's not very original, not particularly funny. Jonathan's perfect, wouldn't change a thing. Episode needed more of him.
Okay, but like, can we circle? We can tie this back to X-Men actually, because Jonathan is the name of the actual Wolverine that is the pet of Laura Kinney Wolverine in the comics. So
Whoa.
I feel like we've stolen the original Jonathan's thunder now by introducing Jonathan, I don't know, what is he? A Chinese crested? Is he a Chihuahua? Something
He's
in
a
there.
crusty dog.
He's a little doggy.
Perhaps Jonathan is yet another seed of the future X-Men movie coming.
The hidden X-Men Easter egg in this week's episode of She-Hulk, courtesy of Nola Pfau from WWAC. You heard it here first on Marvel Standom, folks. Muslim says this is the most interesting combo about She-Hulk. She's not wrong. Kirsty, dare I ask? No.
Well, Mike, I can tell you that I sat down on the sofa this morning and I watched this episode of She-Hulk through to its conclusion. I considered walking straight into the sea, but instead I had a bagel with cream cheese and I sat in the sunshine just thinking about life and the universe. My resolve was to continue making good choices and supporting those I love. What I can say for sure is that this was an episode of television.
It was indeed an episode of television. Nola, what you said about this.
Thank you for asking.
I have to be so careful because I don't want to sound like one of the screaming man babies, which I did laugh at, because I'm afraid that critiquing this episode too harshly is going to make me sound like somebody who belongs on the Intelligentsia website. But Nola, what you said about this show being like fine, almost every week after I finish an episode of She-Hulk, because Kirsty's in the UK and watches these before I wake up. And like every morning, I'm like, well, that was a perfectly adequate 30 minutes of television.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I just couldn't get behind it. The Intelligentsia reveal is cool. I love tying them to exactly the kind of people on the internet who are disliking this show for all of the wrong reasons.
Timely too, with everything that's going on with the Kiwi Farms thing right now. Like the intelligence, very timely.
So yeah, that was interesting, and that sets up some real, I mean, I think, look, does anybody have any doubt left in their mind at all that the baddie behind everything on this show is the leader? I mean, is it even worth debating this at this point?
It's maybe the one thing I've been hoping for from this show. And ever since, Abomination started showing up again, the leader thread from Incredible Hulk is the only thing from that movie that I really enjoyed and was hoping would get followed up on. Because I am not a defender of the Edward Norton Hulk.
Are you a defender of Ang Lee's Hulk? Because that's been a point on this.
I am an ardent defender of Ang Lee's Hulk. I adore that movie. I will watch it over and over again. I have written about it. It is, to my mind, the best single adaptation of the Hulk, and possibly one of the best single superhero movies that has been made.
Wow.
Should have talked about that the whole time.
Yes.
I mean, do you want to have an episode about the Ang Lee Hulk? You can invite me back, and I will happily do so.
Oh, it's on. It's absolutely.
We might have to, because I feel like this keeps coming up, and I'm the one who feels like the alien every time because I just don't get it with that movie. And
it's okay. You're allowed to be wrong.
Yeah, there's this whole movement around that movie now. And I'm like, you know what? I want to be wrong. I want to be wrong. I want to like, I want my eyes to be opened. You know, I would rather feel differently. So help me out here.
It's one of the only movies that really leans into trying to adapt comic books as a form, with all the with the way the panel wipes and the cuts work. Like, it's about the politics of rage is the way that I like to say it. There are scenes that do not hold up well, like the mutant dogs and things like that. But it's a movie about what it means to feel rage and what it means when rage overtakes you and you can't control that. It's far more thoughtful about those things than I think anyone expected from a superhero movie.
Is there anything else about this week's episode of She-Hulk that we feel is really important to hit?
I think this week wastes Patty Harrison, which I did not think it was possible to do. I think she's one of the funniest people I've ever seen in my life. And she has like 7 lines that are completely lifeless.
It also wastes Patty Guggenheim because where is Madison?
That's what I'm asking in every scene in She-Hulk.
Madison isn't on screen. All the other characters should be asking,
where's Madison? I think that's it for this week's Marvel Standom. Thank you so much to our special guest, Nola Pfau. Nola,
hey, thanks for having me.
Anytime, please come back. Ang Lee Hulk or no Ang Lee Hulk, just come join us again. Why in your mind, everybody, where they can check out your work?
Yeah, you can find us at womenwriteaboutcomics.com. Once again, spelled correctly. No Z's or anything like that in there. You can find me online at Nola Pfau on just about every social media platform. Do not try to explain comics to me, ever.
Warning noted. Yes. There was an understated menace to that I have to really appreciate, that I would aspire to, but I'm way too boisterous to be able to like deliver implicit threats that way. Folks, make sure you're subscribing to us wherever you are watching or listening right now. For those of you who only listen to us via podcast, you should know that we actually do these shows live on Twitch every Thursday, more or less. Come see us live on Twitch. We're at twitch.tv/DenofGeekTV. I know I just said every Thursday. This may come as a surprise to some folks, notably our producer. I don't know if we're actually going to be on next Thursday. We might be taking a break next week. Our schedule is going to be a little goofy for the next couple weeks because of some other stuff going on at Den of Geek and then New York Comic Con. But if you think that I'm going to miss a chance to talk about Werewolf by Night, think again. So if we are off next week, don't worry. We'll be back for the Werewolf by Night special. By hook, by crook, by claw, by snout, like I will be there. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Don't forget to check out our web home of denofgeek.com, where you can find all our Marvel coverage. Go straight to denofgeek.com/Marvel, where you can see Kirsty and a whole murderer's row of talented writers giving you the most in-depth analysis of the MCU and Marvel comics you can hope for, maybe other than what you would find on WWAC. Let's be real. Drop us a line. Let us know your burning questions and what you want us to cover in upcoming episodes. You can do that by following Marvel Standom on Twitter and Instagram. Give those a follow, please. Don't forget, we also have a DC show. Check out DC Standom when you can on all major podcast platforms. And if you came in late today, you'll be able to watch this entire episode on denofgeek.com or at our YouTube home, Den of Geek US, which I need to change. Don't forget, you can check out past episodes there and also wherever you get your podcasts. You know how it is. Thank you once again to our special guest, Nola Pfau. Thanks to Andrew Howley, the best producer in any corner of the multiverse. Thank you to Den of Geek's social media coordinator, Lee Parham, for keeping everybody in line in the comments. But you guys have been really well behaved. Like, you got to give this kid some work to do. Like, you're all too polite. But for real, we're so happy that you're all watching. Thank you so much. Go follow our TikTok at Den of Geek TV. Lee is doing great work over there. And a special shout to Michael R. He makes the podcast version of this show all it can be. But most of all, thank each and every one of you for watching, listening, following, and subscribing. This has been Marvel Standom on the Den of Geek Network. Until next time, remember, folks, we stand together.
happened?
I slipped on an ice cube and got covered in boo-boos.
Boo-boos, eh? I think you guys want that hospital.
Weenie Hut General!